Emma Reynolds blended in with every other passenger aboard Flight 227 from Dallas to Denver. She wore jeans, a gray cardigan, and her hair tied in a casual ponytail. Row 12B, window seat. She offered a polite smile to the elderly woman beside her and popped in her earbuds. It was supposed to be a quiet flight, 1 hour, 45 minutes in the air. Nothing more. Emma had taken dozens of flights before, but today she felt especially tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your bones. She hadn't taken a vacation in 2 years, and this short weekend in Denver was supposed to be her escape. The hum of the engines lulled her into calm. A stewardess passed by offering drinks. Emma declined. She was already halfway through a paperback mystery novel. Outside the window, the world looked peaceful, fluffy clouds floating gently, rays of sun splashing over them. Just as she turned a page, the seatbelt light dinged on. Minor turbulence, probably. No one around her seemed concerned. A few passengers chuckled as their cups rattled. The flight attendants moved briskly, but calmly down the aisle. Their steps practiced. Emma didn't think anything of it, until the attendant passed by again, this time moving quickly, her face tight, her lips pressed into a straight line. Another attendant followed right behind her, whispering urgently. That caught Emma's attention. She took her earbuds out. Murmurs around her grew slightly louder. Something wasn't right. Then the intercom crackled. A voice came on. It wasn't the pilot's usual calm greeting. It was someone else. A flight attendant, sounding panicked beneath the effort to stay professional. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a doctor or trained medical professional on board, please come forward immediately. The entire cabin tensed. Heads turned. A few passengers stood hesitantly. Someone pressed the attendant call button. Emma felt her heartbeat pick up. Her hands tightened around her book. The voice returned. More urgent. If you have medical training or aviation training, please make yourself known to the flight crew right away. Now everyone was alert. Some passengers began whispering across aisles. A few stood, looking around, trying to assess the situation. Emma's instincts kicked in. She had heard that tone before, in high-stress combat simulations, in crisis drills, in command centers. It wasn't just turbulence. This was something serious. Out of the corner of her eye, Emma saw the cockpit door. It was open. 2 attendants were inside, visibly struggling. One of them was kneeling over something or someone. Another was holding a radio, frantically calling for help. Then she turned, ran back into the cabin, and addressed the crowd with shaky hands. "We need a pilot," she said, voice cracking. Passengers gasped. A man in the back cursed loudly. The word pilot echoed through the cabin, turning quiet confusion into fear. "We need a pilot," the attendant repeated, more firmly. "If anyone here has flight training, please come forward now." A cold chill ran down Emma's spine. She could have stayed silent, pretended she didn't hear, pretended she wasn't the person they were asking for. After all, it had been years. She wasn't in uniform. No one knew her past. But then, a flight attendant appeared in her row. She held a tablet in her hand. A passenger manifest. She looked directly at Emma. "Are you Emma Reynolds?" she asked softly. Emma froze. Passengers near her turned their heads. The woman beside her clutched her hand. Emma's mouth went dry. Her chest tightened. That name spoken out loud unlocked something deep inside her. A decade ago, Emma Reynolds had flown some of the most dangerous aircraft in the Air Force. She was top of her class in flight school, had even trained with combat teams overseas. But after a crash took her younger brother, also a pilot, she walked away from it all. She hadn't touched a yoke or flight manual since. She built a quiet life teaching high school science. Flying? That part of her life was over, wasn't it? The flight attendant looked increasingly desperate. Air traffic control flagged your name. You're listed as a certified military pilot, right? Emma swallowed hard. She could lie, say it was a mistake. Let someone more current step up. But no one else was standing. No one else was coming. And this plane, it was beginning to drift. She looked toward the cockpit again. She saw the co-pilot, young, sweating, gripping the yoke with white knuckles. And beside him, slumped over in the captain's chair, was the pilot unmoving, unresponsive. Emma felt a strange calm wash over her. A voice inside, small but growing louder, whispered, "You've done this before. You can do it again." She stood. Cabin went silent. "Yeah," she said. "That's me." The attendant's eyes widened. "Come with me." As Emma stepped into the aisle, passengers turned to look at her, confused, afraid, hopeful. Someone whispered, "Is she a pilot?" Number. One knew her. Not yet. But they would. And by the end of this flight, they would never forget the name Emma Reynolds. The moment Emma stepped forward, the mood of the cabin shifted. Fear still clung to the air, but now it mixed with curiosity and a flicker of hope. As the flight attendant led her toward the cockpit, passengers whispered, phones filmed, and heads turned to follow the quiet woman from 12B, the one who might just save them. She passed by a teenage boy clutching his mother's arm. An elderly couple holding hands, their lips moving in silent prayer. A businesswoman watching her with narrowed eyes, as if trying to assess her worth. Emma felt their stares like weight pressing on her shoulders. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" the attendant asked as they reached the cockpit door. "I'm not," Emma replied honestly. "But I'm the only one who is." Inside the cockpit, chaos greeted her like a punch to the gut. The captain, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, lay slumped in his chair, his skin pale and lips tinged blue. An oxygen mask had been placed over his face, but it was clear he wasn't flying this plane again. The young co-pilot turned as she entered, his face a map of panic. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His hands trembled as they hovered uselessly above the instrument panel. I don't know what happened," he stammered. "One minute he was fine. Next thing I know, he's unresponsive. I've tried stabilizing, but turbulence hit and I can't. I'm not ready for this." Emma put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Take a breath. You're not alone now." He blinked at her, as if trying to believe she was real. Then, slowly, he nodded. She looked at the controls, scanning the readings. Altitude, 34,000 feet. Speed, holding but shaky. Fuel, a little low for comfort. And worst of all, outside the windshield, the once calm skies were darkening. Thick, menacing clouds loomed ahead, and lightning flickered at their edges. Emma slid into the captain's seat. It felt both foreign and familiar, like returning to a childhood home that someone else had been living in for years. Her hands hovered over the controls. Muscle memory itched beneath her skin. This was no Air Force fighter jet. This was a commercial Boeing 737, but flying. Flying never left you. She reached for the headset, adjusted the mic. "This is Emma Reynolds. I'm taking control of Flight 227. The co-pilot blinked. "Wait, the Emma Reynolds?" She gave him a sideways glance. "Depends what you've heard." "I read about you in training," he said, awe suddenly breaking through his fear. "You were top of your class. Air Force. Tactical Rescue Ops. You landed that jet with no hydraulics in Qatar." Emma cut him off. "That was a long time ago. Right now, we've got 182 people to land safely and a worsening storm ahead. Let's focus." The cockpit radio came alive with static and a voice. "Flight 227, This is Denver Center. We read the emergency ping. Can you confirm pilot status? Emma clicked the mic. This is Emma Reynolds, formerly USAF, now assuming temporary command. The captain is incapacitated. We require priority clearance and medical assistance on landing. The voice paused, then came back, steadier. Roger, Flight 227. You are authorized for emergency descent protocol. Weather at Denver is unstable. Thunderstorms building. Possible reroute advised. Emma's jaw tightened. Negative. We don't have the fuel. We're coming to Denver. Another pause. Understood. Flight 227. Proceed on heading 302. Runway 8 lighters is being cleared. The co-pilot glanced at her. You sure about this? Emma checked the readings again. Wind speeds were rising. The storm was growing fast, swirling like a living thing ahead of them. It would be tight, dangerous, maybe even foolish. Didn't have the luxury of second guessing. Yes, she said firmly. We go in now. Any delay could be fatal. The co-pilot exhaled slowly, his hands steadier now. Okay, let's do this. Behind them, the flight attendant spoke softly. Should I tell the passengers? Emma hesitated, then reached for the cabin intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice echoing through the aircraft. This is Emma Reynolds. I'm a trained military pilot. I've taken command of Flight 227. We've hit a medical emergency. But we are flying safe, and we're heading for a priority landing. I need everyone to remain calm, remain seated, and trust us. There was a long pause, then applause. A few passengers broke down in tears. Others whispered prayers or held loved ones close. But the panic that had gripped the cabin now softened into fragile trust. The woman in 12B was no longer just a passenger. She was their captain. Emma turned off the intercom and looked back at the storm ahead. This wasn't a combat zone. This was a plane full of civilians, families, strangers counting on her. She was the last line between fear and safety, between sky and ground. And she was ready. Almost. The last time she was in a cockpit, it had ended in a crash and a coffin. Her brothers. She hadn't flown since that day. But sometimes life forces you to return to the places that broke you, so you can rise from them. Emma Reynolds tightened her grip on the yoke, eyes narrowing on the clouds as lightning flashed in the distance. They were going in. The storm ahead swelled like a living beast, dark, electric, angry. Emma stared through the windshield, her fingers tightening slightly around the yoke. Raindrops smacked against the glass like warning taps. The sky looked ready to devour them. But the real storm wasn't outside. It was inside her. The cockpit was quiet except for the soft hum of instruments and the occasional crackle of communication from Denver Center. The co-pilot Kyle was now focused, almost robotic, his eyes darting over the controls, following Emma's lead. The adrenaline had kicked in, but Emma's thoughts were drifting somewhere much further back 9 years ago, the last time she flew a plane. It had been a mission off the coast of Guam, a rescue op. Her younger brother, Noah, was flying lead. They were tight best friends growing up, and even closer in the air. The kind of bond only siblings and squad mates understand. Everything went smoothly until it didn't. An engine fire. Systems failure. She'd made it down. Noah hadn't. She attended his funeral in uniform, saluting his coffin, then turned in her wings 2 days later. That chapter of her life ended in silence. She never flew again, never even entered a cockpit. She buried her career under a pile of grief and guilt, convinced she'd never belong in the sky again. Until now. A harsh jolt shook the aircraft. The storm was getting closer. Lightning streaked across the horizon like claw marks. Emma snapped out of the memory. Adjust altitude. Let's go down 2,000 feet storm fronts hitting harder up here, she said calmly. Kyle obeyed, his voice steadier now. You really haven't flown since you left the Air Force? She nodded. Not once, but you just came back like nothing happened. Emma managed a half smile. It's not nothing. I just don't have the luxury of hesitation today. Kyle looked at her for a long second. I'm glad you're here. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Her throat tightened at the thought of how close they all were to a headline. Ending. Ground control buzzed back in. Flight 227. We have you rerouted for landing on runway 8L. Conditions unstable, but it's your clearest shot. Emma responded, copy that. Continuing descent. ETA 10 minutes. In the cabin, the passengers were tense. Some clutched their seats. Others watched the overhead screen, tracking the slow, downward glide of their altitude. But their fear was slightly tempered now. They had heard her voice. Not the voice of panic, not the shriek of chaos, but control. That kind of voice matters when you're 30,000 feet in the air. Back in the cockpit, Emma looked again at the slumped pilot beside her. The man hadn't moved. His chest barely rose. Still no response? She asked quietly. Kyle shook his head. Medical teams ready on the ground. Emma didn't know him, but still, the sight of a fellow pilot like that struck her. Pilots were supposed to be steady, in command, unshakable. Seeing one collapse mid-flight felt like watching the sky itself fall. But there was no time for emotion now. Time to run the checklist, she said. They went through it together. Landing gear, flaps, hydraulics. Everything was functional, but the turbulence was increasing. Every few seconds, the aircraft dipped or shuddered under invisible fists of air. Wind shears climbing, Kyle noted. And visibility's garbage, Emma nodded. Let's hope muscle memory still works. She wasn't trying to sound brave. She was terrified, not of the landing, but of what this meant. Flying had once been everything to her. Then it became the thing she feared most. Losing Noah had broken her in a way no one else understood. She'd tried to rebuild her life teaching high school, volunteering, keeping her world small. But now here she was, thrown into the sky again, holding the lives of 182 strangers in her hands. It was too late to walk away. And maybe she didn't want to. Denver Center came through again. Flight 227. You are cleared for emergency priority landing. Winds at 15 knots. Visibility dropping. Do you need guidance vectors? No, Emma answered, surprising even herself. We've got it. She clicked off the radio and exhaled. Kyle glanced sideways. You're doing something incredible here. She kept her eyes forward. So are you. Another jolt rocked the plane harder this time. A few gasps echoed from the cabin. Kyle's hand shot toward the controls instinctively, but Emma was already adjusting. Smooth, precise. The aircraft leveled again. Then something happened Emma didn't expect. A tear rolled down her cheek. Just one. She didn't wipe it away. Didn't look at Kyle. She just stared out the windshield as the lights of Denver Airport began to emerge blurry, flickering dots through the veil of storm. Maybe it was the fear. Maybe it was the ghosts of who she used to be. Maybe it was knowing that, for the first time in almost a decade, she felt alive again. They were 5 minutes out. Emma leaned into the mic again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your acting captain speaking. We are on final approach into Denver. Please remain seated. Crew, prepare for landing. The words came naturally. They echoed with something deeper, something the passengers didn't hear. A promise to herself. If we land this plane safely, I'm not done flying. As Denver's flickering runway lights began peeking through the storm, Emma's mind zeroed in. Her hands weren't trembling. Her voice wasn't shaky. Something inside her had clicked. It was like a long-lost part of her had returned. Not just the pilot, but the leader. The one who made decisions without panic. The one who once earned respect in rooms full of generals and airmen. She was back in her element. Just not by choice. Kyle's voice broke the silence. Wind shears. Getting worse. Sensors showing 18 knots and climbing. Emma scanned the instruments. We'll adjust on final. Stick to standard approach speed. He glanced at her. Most would circle back. Emma's eyes stayed forward. Most aren't out of fuel. She wasn't bluffing. Fuel was lower than it should have been, likely from altitude adjustment burns earlier in the flight. They had enough for one landing attempt maybe. A second pass? Not an option. And if visibility dropped below threshold, this was going to be the kind of landing pilots prayed they'd never have to do. She didn't tell Kyle that part. No sense adding more fear to the air. The cockpit lights flickered briefly. Lightning flashed just beyond the left wing. The cabin behind them had gone eerily quiet, save for the occasional nervous cough or whispered prayer. Emma imagined 182 people holding their breath, trusting a woman they hadn't known an hour ago. A woman who hadn't flown in years. She had to land this. Denver Tower's voice returned. Flight 227. We're monitoring all systems. Surface winds now at 20 knots. Visibility dropping to 1.5 miles. Runway 8L is cleared. Emergency crews on standby. Copy that. Emma said. Another jolt rocked the plane. Not turbulence, sheer air pressure shift. Kyle swore under his breath. We're in the wash, he said. I see it, Emma replied, adjusting their descent path. Don't overcompensate. Lightning lit up the cockpit again. For a moment, she saw her own reflection in the windshield eyes, focused, jaw tight. She barely recognized herself. Gear down, she said. Kyle obeyed. The mechanical whine of the landing gear descending gave a strange sense of comfort. At least something was working right. Then, suddenly, stall warning. The system barked. Easy, watch your pitch, Emma said calmly. She adjusted trim, nudged throttle. That's just the wind playing tricks. We're not stalling. Kyle's hands were slick with sweat. How are you so calm? I'm not, she answered. But fear doesn't help anyone. Truth was, every nerve in her body was on fire. But she'd learned long ago, panic is contagious. Control is too. If she panicked, Kyle would fall apart. If Kyle lost it, this plane would go down. So she held her fear inside like an iron dam, forcing herself to function with precision. Speed 148 knots, Kyle reported. On glide slope. Hold her steady, Emma replied. Out of the side window, the storm looked monstrous black. Clouds twisting and snapping lightning like whips. The rain intensified, hitting the fuselage like hammers. It was one of the worst visual approaches she'd ever attempted. And she hadn't attempted one in nearly a decade. But deep down, something in her liked it. Not the danger, the clarity. Every decision mattered. Every second counted. There was no room for overthinking. No room for guilt, grief, or what-ifs. Just input, reaction, correction. Like solving a puzzle at 200 miles per hour. Altitude 900 feet, Kyle called out. Emma narrowed her eyes. Where are the runway lights? They should have been clearer by now. She looked hard, squinting through the rain. Then faint glows in the distance. Runway 8L, still half a mile out, but the crosswinds and other alerts screamed. Wind shear. Detected. The plane lurched sideways, hard. Emma's seatbelt yanked tight. Kyle shouted. The cabin behind them screamed. Emma fought the yoke. Counter-tilted. Reduced throttle. Adjusted flaps. Come on, she muttered. Don't fight me. Now. The plane bucked again, but this time steadied. Kyle exhaled in disbelief. "How did you—" "Flew through a dust storm in Kandahar once," she replied. "This is just rain with an attitude." 200 feet, Kyle called. Emma saw the runway clearer now. The lights lined up like a landing strip in a dream glowing. Distant, promising safety. "Brace," she muttered. She pulled the nose up slightly. 100, throttle down. 50. Wheels extended. 20. A hard crosswind struck at the last second, trying to push the plane off course. Emma dipped the right wing slightly, ruddered left. And then contact. The wheels slammed the runway. The plane bounced once. Then again. Screeching tires. Sparks. Reverse. Thrust engaged. Emma held steady, correcting, guiding, praying. The aircraft skidded down the runway, tires hydroplaning briefly, before finally mercifully grabbing hold. The plane slowed. Screeched. Stopped. Silence. Then applause. Crying. Cheering. Behind her. People wept, laughed, hugged strangers. Emma sat frozen for a second, the hum of the engines fading. The cockpit lights dimmed to idle. The storm still howled outside, but in here, peace. Kyle let out a loud breath. We made it." She glanced at him. "We did." Emergency lights flashed on the tarmac. Crew vehicles approached. Emma finally let herself lean back. She stared at the windshield, at the storm she had just flown through, and thought of Noah. "I did it, little brother," she whispered. And deep in her chest, something long buried stirred to life again. The aircraft sat still on the runway, rain streaking down the windows, the engines humming softly like an exhausted sigh. The chaos had passed, but the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with disbelief, gratitude, and awe. Inside the cabin, nobody moved at first. No one stood. They simply sat processing what had just happened. Then someone began clapping. It started softly, and more hands joined. Within seconds, applause erupted like thunder, wild, relieved, emotional. Some passengers wept, others hugged. A few just stared straight ahead, as if unsure they were truly alive. And then her name came. She saved us. That woman, Emma. She was just a passenger. Someone leaned into the aisle and said louder, "What's her name? The pilot lady?" "Emma Reynolds," said the elderly woman from 12B proudly. "She was right next to me the whole time." Now, it wasn't just applause. It was chants. It was tears. It was strangers calling the name of a woman they hadn't known 2 hours ago, but now wouldn't forget for the rest of their lives. In the cockpit, Emma removed her headset slowly. Her shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in release. Every muscle ached, every nerve buzzed, but inside there was peace. She had done it. Against every fear, every memory, every voice that had told her she couldn't, she had landed that plane. Kyle pulled off his headset and leaned back, hands still shaking. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. Emma looked at him. "You don't have to say anything. You were brave. You trusted me. That's not easy." He gave a small laugh. "No offense, but I almost passed out when they said a passenger was taking over." "I would have too," she said dryly. "I didn't expect to be flying today." Emergency responders knocked at the cockpit door. The flight crew opened it and stepped inside, their faces stunned. The lead flight attendant looked at Emma with wide, glassy eyes. You just flew us through a thunderstorm. Landed with no backup. That was impossible." Emma stood up slowly, her knees stiff. It wasn't impossible. It was necessary. The responders rushed to the collapsed pilot. Paramedics quickly transferred him to a stretcher. He was breathing shallow, but alive. They moved fast, taking vitals, prepping him for the ambulance waiting just outside. As the pilot was carried out, Kyle stepped aside. One responder looked at Emma. "Are you the one who landed this?" Emma hesitated. "We both did." Kyle shook his head. "No, she did." Emma glanced toward the open cockpit door and saw something she hadn't expected: dozens of faces peering in. Passengers, crew, people who had feared for their lives, now staring at her like she wasn't just a pilot, but a savior. The same woman who once swore she'd never fly again was now a hero. The flight attendant extended her hand. "Come on. I want to thank you." Emma wasn't sure she was ready for that, but something inside her nudged her forward. She stepped out into the aisle. A standing ovation erupted. Loud, unfiltered. Real. Phones were up, capturing the moment. People were cheering, clapping, reaching out to shake her hand. One woman burst into tears and hugged Emma like she was family. A child whispered, "Mommy, that's the lady who flew the plane." Emma smiled gently, overwhelmed but calm. Didn't want the spotlight, but she understood what it meant. To these people, she wasn't just the woman from seat 12B anymore. She was something more: proof that heroes don't always wear uniforms. That strength sometimes returns when you least expect it. She raised a hand in quiet gratitude. "Thank you. Thank you all." The co-pilot joined her in the aisle, patting her shoulder. "That was the smoothest rough landing I've ever experienced." She smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Airport security and medical staff began escorting passengers off the plane, row by row. Emma stayed back with the crew, still processing everything. Then one of the senior FAA officials stepped into the cabin. "Emma Reynolds?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. He extended his hand. "We've been listening since you made contact with Denver Center. You pulled off a textbook emergency, landing under maximum stress. That's not just impressive, it's extraordinary." Emma shook his hand, unsure how to respond. "I'd like to talk to you further once everyone's safe," he continued. "There may be opportunities, if you're open." Opportunities? She hadn't thought past the landing. She hadn't thought about what came next at all. But something deep inside stirred again. Something she hadn't felt in years, like a compass slowly spinning back toward its true north. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. She stood near the front exit as the last passengers stepped off. Some paused to thank her. A few embraced her. One slipped a handwritten note into her palm. She didn't look at it yet. She was still watching the rain. Still thinking of the sky. Still wondering, was she meant to fly again? When the cabin finally emptied, she sat alone in row 12B, where this all began. She looked at the seat beside her, where the old woman had once sat, and smiled to herself. "You're not just a passenger anymore," she whispered. Emma sat on a bench inside the airport's private security wing. A blanket draped around her shoulders, though she wasn't cold. A steaming cup of coffee sat untouched beside her. The chaos of the last 3 hours hadn't yet fully sunk in, and it played in her mind like a hazy recording engine's groaning. Alarms blaring. Kyle's panicked voice, the weight of the yoke in her hands. And now, silence. Her phone buzzed. Dozens of missed calls. Unknown numbers. 2 voicemails. A message from her principal at the high school. "Emma, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Call me." News? She opened her phone. The headlines hit her like a gust of wind. Passenger heroically lands plane after pilot collapse. Former Air Force pilot saves 182 lives. Passenger in 12B is a decorated veteran. Why she walked away from the sky. Emma Reynolds. Teacher, pilot. Hero. A video clip autoplayed a shaky passenger recording from mid-flight, showing Emma walking to the front, steady and calm. Another showed her standing in the aisle after landing, Passengers clapping, faces beaming. She felt exposed, like her life had been peeled open and laid out for the world. She hadn't wanted recognition. She hadn't even wanted to fly again. She just did what had to be done. But the world had noticed, and it wasn't going to look away. The door creaked open. The same FA official who met her on the plane entered with a smile and a stack of papers in his hand. "Emma," he said warmly, "I'm not going to pretend we're not impressed. That landing was masterful." She managed a tired smile. "Thanks." He sat across from her. "Your name's buzzing everywhere, news, aviation circles, even military command. I've already had 3 retired generals text me asking, 'Is that the Emma Reynolds?'" She sighed. "I was hoping to disappear after this," he chuckled. "Well, you're going to have to try harder." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We've pulled your old flight logs. I knew your record, but, Emma, some of your missions were borderline legendary. And now you've just saved nearly 200 lives. I want you to consider coming back." Emma raised an eyebrow. "To what? The Air Force?" "No," he said. "To the skies. Commercial. Charter. Emergency training. There are programs begging for someone like you." She shook her head slowly. "I stopped flying for a reason." "You're allowed to change your reason," he said gently. That hit her hard. He handed her a card. "No pressure. But if you want your certifications reactivated, you've got people who'll make it happen fast. You're not just a one-time hero, Emma. You're a pilot. You always were." She looked at the card in her hand, a piece of paper. A simple offer, but to her, it was a door, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to walk through it. Later that evening, Emma sat alone in her hotel room, staring out the window as the storm outside continued to rage. Denver hadn't cleared up. Thunder cracked every few minutes. The sky still looked angry, but the kind of angry she no longer feared. Her fingers grazed the edge of the bedside table, where a folded note lay untouched since she left the plane. The one a passenger had slipped into her hand. She opened it. "You saved my daughter's life. I was on my way to bury my father. You gave me one last moment with him. I'll never forget you." 19C. Emma folded the note back slowly. Eyes stinging dot. It wasn't just a landing dot. It was a gift. A ripple. Something bigger than her. And maybe. She wasn't done giving that dot. She reached for her duffel bag. Inside was her old flight logbook. She hadn't looked at it in 9 years. The leather was worn, edges fraying. Her name was still etched into the cover. CAPT. Emma Reynolds, USAF 422nd Tactical Airlift Squadron. Her thumb traced the letters like reading a forgotten language. She opened it. Her last logged flight. Qatar. Emergency descent. Engine failure. Loss of wing hydraulics. Successful landing. 1 fatality. LT Noah Reynolds. She closed the book. It would never stop hurting. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be stuck in that pain forever. The knock came at 11 p.m. She opened. Door to find Kyle, standing there in civilian clothes, soaked from the rain but grinning sheepishly. "I figured you wouldn't be sleeping," he said. She let him in. They sat by the window, watching the storm. "You ever going to fly again?" he asked after a moment. She didn't answer right away. "Then, I'm thinking about it." He smiled. "You should. You're the best pilot I've ever seen." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I know." "Me too." They sat in silence. Then Kyle said, "You know, when the pilot collapsed, I froze. Completely. I thought we were going to die. Then they said your name, and you walked up front, and I swear, it felt like the plane breathed again." She looked at him. And that's when she realized this wasn't just about a flight. It was about purpose, impact, Legacy. The world didn't need her to be perfect, just present. And up there, in that storm, she had been more present than she'd felt in years. The clouds outside flashed again. But she no longer feared the lightning. She respected it. And maybe it respected her back. 3 days had passed since the landing, but for Emma Reynolds, it still felt like it had happened that morning. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in that cockpit, the roar of the storm, Kyle's voice beside her, the feel of the yoke trembling in her hands. But now, something had changed. She wasn't haunted by it. She missed it. The world outside had moved fast. News vans parked outside her hotel. Reporters left voicemails. Aviation podcasts requested interviews. And every morning, her inbox lit up with new headlines. Miracle in the sky. Emma Reynolds named Honorary Pilot of the Year. Reynolds receives FAA commendation after heroic emergency landing. She didn't reply to most of them, but the email she did open came from the National Transportation Safety Board. It was short, direct, respectful. Captain Reynolds, we would be honored if you join our emergency aviation safety panel next quarter. Your experience and skill would be invaluable to our team and future training simulations. Director Callan, she hadn't been called Captain in years. Now, it followed her like a name she never lost, just paused. That afternoon, Emma stood on a quiet airstrip just outside Denver. Kyle had arranged it. An old pilot friend of his owned a pair of vintage training aircraft and said Emma could take one up, just to feel it again. She hadn't said yes, but somehow, here she was. The wind was light. The runway stretched before her like a promise. One of the hangar staff handed her a headset. Cessna 172, simple and smooth, fuel-topped. She's yours if you want her. Emma nodded, heartbeat rising. She climbed into the small plane, her fingers brushing familiar controls. She took a deep breath. This wasn't like that day on flight 227. There were no lives at stake, no collapsing pilots, just sky and silence. And the question, are you still a pilot? Or was that just a moment of luck? She turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. She taxied to the edge of the runway, radioed in. Then she waited. Not because she was afraid, but because she was finally listening to herself. If you go up, there's no more pretending this part of your life is over. She exhaled. And pushed forward. The wheels lifted off like they remembered how the sky welcomed her like she'd never left. At 2,500 feet, the city looked small beneath her. Roads, rooftops, fields, everything that had felt overwhelming, now distant, manageable. Up here, things made sense. Gravity obeyed. Wind spoke clearly. And the past didn't feel like a chain. It felt like something she could carry, not something she had to run from. She banked left over the foothills. The air was crisp, the plane steady. Her fingers relaxed on the yoke. She smiled. She wasn't flying away from anything. She was flying toward something. Later that night, back at the hotel, she finally returned a call from Principal Harris. He answered on the second. Ring, Emma. God, it's good to hear your voice. Are you okay? Everyone here's talking about you like you're some kind of superhero. I'm okay, she said quietly. Better than I've been in a long time. I saw the press conference, he said. That kid in your physics class, you know, the one who never listens? He told everyone, my teacher could fly a plane better than Iron Man. She laughed. That's a stretch. He paused, then asked gently, are you coming back? Emma didn't answer immediately. I don't know, she said honestly. I might be needed somewhere else now. A long pause. You've always been more than just a teacher, he finally said. Whatever you do next, just don't forget what you meant to us. She smiled. I won't. As the call ended, she looked at the card the FIA officer had given her days earlier. Then at her flight logbook. She opened it. And for the first time in nearly a decade, she added a new entry. Date: July 17th aircraft. Cessna 172 duration. 1.2 hours. Purpose: personal reorientation location. Denver regional notes. First solo flight since Noah. Result: sky still feels like home. She closed the logbook and set it gently on the table. That night, she didn't dream of the crash. She dreamed of flying through clouds, of laughter in the cockpit, of her brother sitting beside her, again not judging, not grieving, just flying. The storm had passed, inside and out. And tomorrow, Emma Reynolds would take the next step toward something she never expected belonging. 2 weeks later, Emma Reynolds stood beneath the massive glass windows of the FAA Aviation Training Center in Oklahoma City. The morning sun glinted off the parked aircraft outside. Everything gleamed: metal, sky, and opportunity. She held a slim folder in her hand, a reactivation request, instructor credentials, and medical clearance. At the top, her name, Captain Emma Reynolds. Behind her were the voices of new cadets arriving fresh, nervous, full of adrenaline and ambition. Some carried books, others held coffee. They reminded her of herself, years ago, before the crash, before the silence, before she buried her wings. Now, she was here to reclaim them. She stepped inside. The lobby buzzed with controlled energy. A receptionist looked up and smiled. "Captain Reynolds?" Emma nodded. "Director Callan is expecting you. He's in Simulator Bay 3. As Emma walked through the hallways, memories returned in vivid flashes: briefings, laughter, storms, late-night flight drills. It didn't hurt to remember anymore. It felt like picking up an old book you once loved. Only now you understood the ending better. Bay 3 opened with a soft whoosh. Inside, a state-of-the-art flight simulator waited. Kyle stood nearby, already in uniform. He grinned when he saw her. "Told you I wasn't going to let you disappear," he said. Emma smirked. "I had a feeling." Kyle motioned to the simulator. "Today's group? 3 cadets, all sharp, all scared. They've heard about the Denver flight, by the way. You're kind of legendary now." She rolled her eyes. "That's not what this is about." "No," he agreed. "But it's why they'll listen to you." The simulator doors opened. With a hiss, Emma stepped inside and took the pilot's seat. The screens lit up with a virtual skyline. Storm clouds built slowly on the horizon. The setup was nearly identical to what she'd flown during Flight 227. Her fingers settled instinctively on the controls. And for the first time, she felt not just capable, but called. The cadets filed in behind her, wide-eyed, quiet. One looked barely 20. Another had a notepad clutched in his hands like it might save him. Emma turned around slowly. "I'm not here to impress you," she said. "I'm here because one day the unexpected will happen. Maybe in a storm, maybe mid-air, maybe when. No one else knows what to do. And in that moment, you won't have time to think about fear." She let the words land. "You'll only have time to fly." The room was silent. And one cadet finally asked, "Ma'am, were you scared that day, when you stepped into that cockpit?" Emma didn't lie. "I was terrified." They looked stunned. "But I moved anyway," she continued. "Because fear doesn't stop the plane. Action does. Training does. Trust does." The simulator roared to life. The cadets took their seats. Emma guided them through the same emergency protocols she'd used weeks before. She showed them how to breathe when the alarms scream, how to level a plane in wind shear, how to lead when you're the last hope. And with every word, with every motion, something inside her settled. Not back into the past. Forward. Not into something new. After the session, Kyle walked with her back toward the office. You know, he said, I think you might have just saved more lives today than you did on that flight. Emma smiled. That's the plan. Outside, the sky was a deep, endless blue. She looked up. Not with longing, but with peace. That night, she flew commercial again, but this time as a guest of honor. The airline had invited her to the recognition gala in Washington, D.C. As the young aircraft climbed, the captain gave a special announcement over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to share that on board today is Emma Reynolds, the woman who turned an ordinary seat into the captain's chair and brought 182 souls home in the middle of a storm. Applause filled the cabin. Emma didn't stand. She simply nodded and smiled politely from her window seat. She no longer needed the spotlight. The sky itself was enough. At the gala, she wore a navy blue suit, not her uniform, not a dress, just herself. She shook hands with executives, hugged passengers from that flight, and gave one short speech. I used to think flying was something I left behind, but that day reminded me it was never gone. Sometimes the sky finds you again, and when it does, you don't say no, you fly. A standing ovation followed. Later that evening, on her hotel balcony, she looked at the stars. She pulled out her flight logbook once more, flipped to the next blank page, and wrote, date, August. 3 aircraft, Boeing 737 simulator duration, 2.5 hours purpose, instructor training, emergency, response location, FAA Training Center notes, first session teaching cadets. Result, I'm not just flying again. I'm helping others learn to land. She closed the log, leaned back, and whispered to the wind, this is what I was meant to do.